For years, my daughter Vanessa mocked my cooking, but that evening, when she ridiculed my late husband's favorite beef stew right in front of everyone, something inside me finally shattered completely. She still wonders why Dad had cholesterol problems, she joked, raising her wine glass. Her wealthy friends broke into laughter around my dining table. The room went completely dead. My son stared intently at his plate, and my youngest daughter looked like she was about to cry. As for me, I just stood there frozen in my outdated kitchen, gripping the serving spoon so hard my hand ached. That night, after 40 years of maintaining our Sunday family dinners, I made a quiet decision. Vanessa would never be invited back. She thought she was just insulting the food. She had no idea she was destroying the very last bond holding this family together. If you have ever been hurt by someone you love, I really want to hear your story. If emotional family stories like this resonate with you, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching this video from and what time it is over there. I always read your comments. Please. My name is Nicole Blake. I'm 67 years old, a widow, and I live alone in a small brick house in Dayton, Ohio. This is the place where I raised my children. Most of my days are very quiet. I wake up before sunrise because my body still remembers the schedule I kept for decades. I make coffee with the old machine Thomas bought me 23 years ago from a Sears department store that has long since gone out of business. I water the flowers on the porch. Around 7 in the morning, I feed a stray orange cat that visits my backyard. Then I just sit in the silence. People always think that as you get older, silence brings peace. Sometimes it does, but other times, the silence feels like grief echoing through empty rooms. My husband, Thomas Blake, has been gone for 8 years now. Even saying those words out loud still feels unreal to me. 8 years. Sometimes around 5:30 in the afternoon, I still reflexively turn toward the front door, expecting to hear the jingling of his keys. Thomas was the kind of man who made the whole house feel warm the moment he walked through the door. He was tall, steady, had a gentle voice, and a hearty laugh. He worked at a manufacturing plant just outside of town for 35 years. Yet he never once complained about the hard labor. Every Friday night, coming home smelling of machine oil and winter air, he would kiss my forehead and ask the exact same question. "What's for dinner tonight, Nick?" Whether I made soup with grilled cheese or pot roast with mashed potatoes, he ate it like he was enjoying a 5-star feast, especially on Sundays. To Thomas, Sunday dinner was sacred. Every Sunday at exactly 4 o'clock, our table was always piled high with food, filled with noise, laughter, and stories. The tradition started when the kids were young and money was incredibly tight. We couldn't afford vacations or expensive restaurants, so Thomas said family dinner would be our luxury. As long as we eat together, he used to say, we stay together. Back then, I believed that with all my heart. Maybe I still do. I have 3 children. Jason Blake is my middle son, 42 years old. He lives about 20 minutes away with his wife and 2 boys. Jason has always been steady and kind, just like his father. He works as an HVAC technician and has never been embarrassed by where he came from. Then there is my youngest daughter, Rachel Blake. Rachel teaches 2nd grade at a nearby elementary school. She's soft-hearted and deeply emotional, the kind of woman who cries at holiday commercials and rescues injured birds in parking lots. She calls me almost every single night just to make sure I've eaten dinner. And finally, there is Vanessa, my eldest daughter. She goes by Vanessa Blackwood now, after marrying Ethan Blackwood. Vanessa was smart and fiercely ambitious from the time she was a little girl. She always craved more than this small town could offer. More money, more elegance, more status. Even as a child, she hated thrift stores, hand-me-down clothes, and old furniture. At 16, she told me she planned to leave Dayton forever. By 22, she did. Now she lives in a luxury condo in downtown Chicago, complete with marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. She works in corporate marketing, and Ethan works in finance. Their entire life looks perfectly curated, straight out of a magazine cover, at least online. The strange thing is, Vanessa wasn't always ashamed of us. When she was a little girl, she used to stand right next to me in the kitchen, wearing Thomas's oversized apron with the hem dragging on the floor. She would use both hands to stir brownie batter, licking the frosting off the spoon when she thought I wasn't looking. "Mom," she said to me when she was 9, "your chicken soup could make anyone feel better." I remember that line because Thomas laughed and said, "See, even the kids know your magic." Sometimes I truly wonder where that little girl vanished to, or perhaps life simply taught her that love is less valuable than wealth. After Thomas passed away, Sunday dinners became even more important to me. Grief changes a family. At first, it pulls everyone closer. Then slowly, quietly, it begins to push people in different directions. I was terrified that without Thomas keeping us anchored, everyone would drift apart, living their own separate lives until holidays became awkward obligations rather than true reunions. So I kept cooking, every single Sunday. Roast chicken, beef stew, cornbread, pot roast, homemade macaroni and cheese, peach pies in the summer, and turkey with stuffing during the colder months. I cooked because it was the only way I knew to keep people close, and for a while, it worked. Jason would still show up early to help set the table. Rachel would bring flowers or dessert. The grandkids ran up and down the hallway, and the old radio in the kitchen softly played Motown music. But Vanessa changed after she moved to Chicago. At first, it was just the little things. She started criticizing the butter, then the salt, then the sugar, then the portion sizes, then the furniture, then the curtains, and finally, me. "You still cook like it's 1985, Mum. You do know people don't eat carbs like this anymore, right? Everything here is just so heavy." In the beginning, she said these things with a laugh, so everyone else laughed along, including me. That's how humiliation works. When it starts slowly, you convince yourself it isn't real. You tell yourself they don't mean it. You make excuses because the truth hurts too much. But as time went on, her comments grew sharper and meaner. Before every Sunday dinner, I started getting anxious in my own kitchen, checking the seasoning countless times, guessing what Vanessa would criticize next. I even altered recipes I had made for 30 years because I suddenly felt ashamed of them. I remember standing in the grocery store one Sunday afternoon, holding a package of butter, just frozen there for nearly 5 minutes. In my head, I could already hear Vanessa's voice. "Mum, do you know how unhealthy that is?"
I put it back on the shelf. Then I cried in my car. It sounds ridiculous now, crying over a package of butter. But it was never about the butter. It was the growing realization that your own child no longer sees any value in the very things that used to fill your home with love.
The worst part was that I still set a place for her every single Sunday. Because no matter how much Vanessa changed, a part of me still believed that the little girl in Thomas's oversized apron would come back one day. I just didn't realize how much damage hope could cause before it finally broke. The first time Vanessa openly mocked my cooking was when we were gathered around the table eating meatloaf. Nothing fancy, just the same recipe I'd been making since she was 12. Jason was already having his second helping. Rachel was helping her little son cut his green beans into tiny pieces. The room smelled of warm gravy and fresh bread. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Then, Vanessa put down her fork and let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh my goodness, Mom," she chuckled. "Are you still using real butter in the mashed potatoes?" The table went quiet for a second. I laughed nervously. "Well, yes." Vanessa and Ethan exchanged a look. "No wonder," Ethan muttered with a soft laugh. Rachel immediately chimed in. "But it tastes amazing." "I didn't say it tasted bad," Vanessa replied. "I'm just saying this is exactly why America has a health crisis." She laughed again, as if using that tone somehow turned it into a harmless joke. I remember looking at my plate, suddenly losing my appetite completely. Jason tried to shift the conversation. "So, Mom, are you growing tomatoes again this year?" But Vanessa wasn't finished. "I'm serious, Rick, she continued. "You do know people cook healthy now, right? Air fryers exist for a reason." I forced a tight smile because everyone else looked so uncomfortable. "You managed to survive on my cooking just fine, growing up." Vanessa shrugged. "Barely." After that, everyone squeezed out forced smiles, but the temperature in the room had completely shifted, and pattern emerged from that point on. Every Sunday, every meal, another comment, another joke, another reminder that the food I spent hours preparing for the people I loved had become an embarrassment to my own daughter. Sometimes it was subtle. These dinner rolls are so dense. Does this house own any spices besides salt? Mum, nobody under 70 eats casseroles anymore. Other times, it was worse. One night, I made fried chicken because the grandkids loved it. Vanessa stared at the platter as if I had placed poison on the table. You know, she said, sipping her wine, there are entire documentaries about this kind of food. Jason rolled his eyes immediately. Can we just have a nice meal without turning dinner into a TED Talk? Vanessa ignored him. I'm just trying to help Mum evolve a little bit. Evolve. That word echoed in my mind all night, as if I was some obsolete object that needed upgrading, like an old appliance, a piece of worn furniture, or just an old woman. The hardest part wasn't even the criticism itself. It was the way Ethan encouraged her behaviour. When Vanessa first brought Ethan home years ago, he seemed charming at first. He had expensive suits, a perfect smile, and a smooth voice. The kind of man who always looks you dead in the eye when he speaks to make himself seem sincere. But over time I noticed something. Ethan loved making other people feel small, especially those he viewed as beneath him. He never insulted me directly. Men like Ethan rarely do. Instead, he used politeness as a weapon. Oh, Nicole, this meal is incredibly nostalgic. Wow, I haven't eaten food like this since college. This is very authentic Midwestern comfort food. Every sentence sounded like a compliment until you caught the underlying tone, and Vanessa began to act exactly like him. One Sunday afternoon, I spent nearly 6 hours cooking. Pot roast, honey-glazed carrots, homemade biscuits, and an apple pie from scratch. I even used the beautiful tablecloth Thomas and I bought in Tennessee to celebrate our 25th anniversary. I wanted everything to be perfect because Vanessa was bringing a few colleagues from Chicago who happened to be passing through town. To this day, I don't know why I cared so much. Perhaps a mother never truly stops trying to win her children's approval. Her colleagues arrived looking like they had stepped right out of a magazine ad. Flawless hair, designer boots, expensive watches. The women politely complimented my house. One of the men looked around my dining room and asked, "Wow, how long have you lived here?" 38 years, I answered proudly. Vanessa chuckled softly. She refuses to update anything. Everyone laughed politely. Just like that, the familiar shame began creeping into my chest again. Dinner started out normal enough. Everyone ate, talked, and laughed. Then one of Vanessa's colleagues took a bite of the roast and smiled. This is absolutely incredible. Before I could even say thank you, Vanessa spoke up. Oh, trust me, everything tastes delicious. The price is just a heavy toll on your arteries. A wave of laughter broke out across the table. It wasn't loud or cruel, but it was enough. Enough to make my face burn bright red. Enough to make me suddenly feel ridiculous. A 67-year-old woman standing here in an apron, trying to impress people who would never respect me. Rachel frowned immediately. Vanessa? What? She asked with complete innocence. I'm just kidding. Jason set his fork down with a heavy clatter. You make a joke out of Mum every single meal. Vanessa blinked. Oh, please. Everyone is being so dramatic. Ethan offered a slight smirk, but remained silent. I quickly stood up. Does anyone want more tea? I always did that. Deflect, smooth things over. Pretend nothing hurt, because I was too terrified that conflict would completely ruin the dinner. But deep down, dinner had been ruined long ago. I just hadn't admitted it yet. Later that evening, after everyone left, Rachel stayed behind to help me clean up. She dried the dishes while I packed the leftovers into plastic containers. Finally, she looked at me closely and asked, Mum, why do you tolerate her doing that? My eyes remained fixed on the sink. She doesn't mean it. Rachel sighed gently. No, she does. My hands paused for a second. The words stung because I knew Rachel was right, but I still found myself defending Vanessa. She's under a lot of stress. Chicago is incredibly competitive. Her entire world is different now. Rachel shook her head. No, Mum, success doesn't make a kind person cruel. I didn't answer because I didn't know how to. The truth was, I kept making excuses because the alternative was too overwhelming to bear. If Vanessa truly meant it, if she honestly looked down on me, then maybe I had quietly lost my daughter years ago without even realizing it. After Rachel left, I sat alone in the kitchen for nearly an hour. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Staring at the leftover biscuits on the counter, I suddenly remembered something Thomas told me right after Vanessa moved away. She's trying too hard to be someone important. At the time, I laughed and asked him what he meant. Thomas shrugged. People who are genuinely comfortable with who they are don't need to spend all their time proving they're better than where they came from. I wished so desperately that he was still alive. Not because he could magically fix everything, but because Vanessa never acted this way when he was around. Thomas possessed a quiet authority that kept everyone grounded. Even Vanessa softened in her father's presence. After he died, something shifted. It was as if she decided she could finally erase the unremarkable parts of her life. Unfortunately, I was one of those parts. Still, every Sunday, I kept cooking, kept hoping, kept believing that maybe the next dinner would be different. Maybe Vanessa would offer a compliment. Maybe she would remember who she used to be. Maybe she would stop treating my love like an embarrassment. But hope becomes dangerous when you keep accepting pain just to maintain it. I was getting closer to my limit. I just didn't know it yet. Thanksgiving used to be my favorite day of the year. Not Christmas, not birthdays. Thanksgiving. Because for that one night, my entire family would sit under the same roof with absolutely no distractions. There was no rush to unwrap gifts. No expectation of expensive items. Just food, stories, and togetherness. At least, that's how it used to feel. The Thanksgiving that changed everything started at 5:30 in the morning. I remember it clearly because the sky was still pitch black when I tied my apron strings and turned on the kitchen lights. The house looked beautiful. I had spent 2 days preparing. Fresh rosemary was arranged in small glass jars across the dining table. The good plates were polished and laid out next to folded cloth napkins. A pumpkin-scented candle burned by the window. In the kitchen, Thomas's favourite jazz station played softly while I cooked. The turkey was roasting in the oven. Sweet potatoes were cooling on the counter. Homemade cornbread. Green bean casserole. Mashed potatoes whipped with butter and cream exactly the way Thomas loved them. And the beef stew. That stew was a family recipe passed down for nearly 30 years. Thomas used to request it every single winter. "Make that stew, Nick," he would say. "That stuff could fix broken bones." Stirring the pot that morning, I thought about him with a smile on my face. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. Maybe Thanksgiving would be different. Maybe Vanessa would relax. Maybe everyone could simply enjoy being together again. I should have known better. Around 3 in the afternoon, Rachel arrived first, bringing pies from a bakery near her school. "You've been cooking since daybreak again, haven't you?" she asked, kissing my cheek. I chuckled softly. "You know me." Jason arrived 30 minutes later with his sons, bursting through the front door like little hurricanes. The house instantly came alive. The football game was playing in the living room. The grandkids chased each other down the hallway. Jason snuck a few pieces of turkey from the kitchen when he thought I wasn't looking. For a moment, everything felt almost perfect. Then Vanessa arrived. Somehow, even before she spoke a single word, the entire atmosphere shifted. You know how some people carry an intense, stressful energy the moment they walk into a room? That was Vanessa now. She walked in, wearing a beige designer coat that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment back when Thomas was alive. Ethan followed behind her, holding an expensive bottle of wine. Behind them was another couple. Vanessa's friends from Chicago. "Mom," Vanessa said quickly, giving me a brief cheek kiss. "This is Claire and Benjamin." The woman smiled politely. The man shook my hand warmly. "Your home is beautiful," Claire said kindly. Before I could answer, Vanessa laughed. "It's very vintage Ohio." I forced a smile. Rachel immediately lowered her head, looking at the floor. About an hour later, we all moved into the dining room. The table looked gorgeous. The candles cast a soft glow. Steam rose from the serving platters, and the grandkids were laughing happily. For one brief second, I looked around the room and imagined Thomas sitting at the head of the table once again. Then Vanessa spoke. "Oh, wow," she said, eyeing the food. "Mom made enough food to feed an entire army." Jason shrugged. "That's what Thanksgiving is supposed to be." Vanessa poked the mashed potatoes with her spoon. "Do you guys even know how much butter is probably in here?" Rachel let out a soft sigh under her breath. I kept my smile forced. "It's only once a year." Ethan chuckled. "Nicole believes holiday calories don't count." Everyone offered polite laughter. I laughed too, because that's just what I always did. Dinner went on. At first, the conversation was passable. Claire complimented the turkey. Benjamin and Jason talked about football. The kids excitedly talked over one another, But Vanessa kept making remarks about the sodium, the portions, and Midwestern eating habits. Then she started criticizing the kitchen itself. "Mum, you're seriously still using these cabinets?" I looked up from pouring gravy. "What's wrong with them?" "They're prehistoric." Rachel finally snapped a little bit. "They're cabinets, Vanessa. They hold plates. I think they're doing their job." Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, goodness, relax. I'm just saying Mom deserves better." The room fell quiet again. That happened a lot around Vanessa lately. A comment would be made, and the conversation would just die. It was as if everyone was constantly walking on eggshells. But I kept serving food, kept smiling, kept trying. Then Benjamin took a bite of the beef stew. His eyes widened immediately. "Wow," he said, gesturing with his spoon toward me. "This is incredible." For the first time all evening, I smiled genuinely. "Thank you." Claire quickly chimed in. "Seriously, the flavor is spectacular." Right then, Vanessa laughed. It wasn't a soft chuckle, it was a sharp snort. "Oh, trust me, everything tastes spectacular. That's the problem." Jason frowned immediately. "Vanessa." But she kept going. "No, I'm serious. Every meal Mum cooks is basically designed to clog your arteries." Ethan smirked into his wine glass. Rachel stared intently at her plate. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Benjamin awkwardly tried to save the moment. "Well, honestly, my grandmother used to cook like this too." Vanessa waved her hand dismissively. "Exactly. A different era." Then she raised her spoon again and delivered the sentence that changed everything. "Which explains why Dad had cholesterol problems." Dead silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Even the grandkids stopped talking. I think my brain stopped working for a split second because Thomas didn't die from cholesterol problems. He died in a car accident on his way home from work. Vanessa knew that. Everyone sitting at that table knew that. Rachel looked horrified. "Vanessa," she whispered. Jason slammed his fork onto the table. "What is wrong with you?" Vanessa blinked, acting as if she genuinely didn't understand the reaction. "Oh my gosh, I didn't mean it literally. You brought Dad into this over a bowl of beef stew," Jason snapped. Vanessa immediately crossed her arms. Why is everyone so sensitive? Standing at the table holding the gravy boat, I suddenly realized my hands were shaking. Not a slight tremor, but a violent shake. I set the gravy boat down before I dropped it. Claire looked extremely uncomfortable now. Benjamin stared at the table. Ethan finally spoke up. "I think everyone is overreacting." Rachel stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "The two of you humiliate Mama every single time you come here." Vanessa laughed in disbelief. "Humiliate her? Are you serious?" I couldn't speak. That was the strangest part. It felt as though all the hurt accumulated over the past few years had finally piled too high in my chest. Suddenly I couldn't force the smile anymore. I couldn't smooth things over. I couldn't pretend. Because this time, she hadn't just insulted my cooking. She had insulted the memory of the man I loved most. Jason looked ready to explode. Rachel was on the verge of tears. The grandkids sat frozen in confusion. And Vanessa just stood there, looking annoyed rather than ashamed. In that moment, something inside me quietly shifted, permanently. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just slowly untied my apron and laid it on the kitchen counter. Then I looked directly at my daughter. For the first time in years, I stopped making excuses for her. Later that Thanksgiving night, after everyone had left, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the barely touched leftovers. The house was finally quiet. Too quiet. Dirty dishes were piled next to the sink. Half-empty wine glasses were scattered across the dining table. One of the grandkids had left a toy truck under a chair. Normally after a family meal, even when exhausted, I felt a sense of fulfillment. Tired, but full.
That night I felt empty.
Moving slowly around the kitchen, my hands shook as I wrapped the leftovers in foil. The turkey, the cornbread, the sweet potatoes, the beef stew. Thomas's favourite beef stew. The exact same pot of stew Vanessa used to joke about her father's memory. Holding the lid, I suddenly froze. For the first time all evening, I began to cry out loud. It wasn't a neat, quiet cry. It wasn't the kind of movie cry where tears silently slide down your cheek. It was the kind of crying that bends you double because the pain becomes too heavy to stand up straight. Holding onto the counter with one hand, I sobbed into the empty kitchen where I had spent most of my adult life, cooking for the people I loved. Or the people I thought I loved. At some point, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Rachel. I hadn't even realized she stayed. "Oh, Mom." Her voice broke instantly. I quickly wiped my face. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." She walked over and wrapped her arms around me, holding me the way I used to hold her when she had nightmares as a child. Suddenly, a terrible realization washed over me. My children had spent years watching me slowly shrink in my own home. Rachel pulled back, looking furious now. "I can't believe she said that about Dad." I looked down at the container of beef stew. She didn't mean it that way. Rachel's expression changed instantly. It wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief. "Mom," she whispered, "why do you always protect her?"
I didn't answer because I truly didn't know anymore. Perhaps mothers are hardwired to protect their children, even when those children become the ones who hurt them.
Jason came in from outside a few minutes later, having finished loading leftovers into his truck. His jaw was still tight with anger. "If she ever speaks to you like that again, I'm cutting her off," he said flatly. "Jason, no," he interrupted. "I'm serious." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing by the table. "She acts like she's ashamed of this family." Rachel nodded silently. Jason looked at me again. "And Ethan is worse." I let out a heavy sigh. "He just goes along with her." "No," Jason countered immediately. "He encourages her." Deep down, I knew he was right. Ethan never checked Vanessa. He never softened her comments. If anything, he seemed amused by them. It was as if watching Vanessa criticize her own family somehow validated that they were above us. Jason leaned against the counter now. "You know what Dad would do if he were here tonight?" The question hit me hard because, yes, I knew exactly what Thomas would do. Thomas never tolerated cruelty, especially within the family. He believed disagreements were normal, but humiliation was different. Humiliation destroys trust. And once trust breaks inside a family, everything else eventually crumbles with it. I slowly looked around the kitchen. The old cabinets Vanessa hated, the faded wallpaper, the scratches on the dining table from decades of family dinners. Thomas had built that table with his own hands in our garage during the summer of 1994. Jason had carved his initials underneath it when he was 11. Rachel had spilled red paint on one corner during an elementary school art project. Vanessa used to sit at this exact table crying over algebra homework while Thomas stayed up with her until midnight. Every mark in this room held a memory, but Vanessa only saw something outdated, cheap, and embarrassing. Rachel quietly finished helping me clean, and Jason took the trash out. Nobody mentioned Vanessa for a while. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Vanessa. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before opening it. "Mum, were you guys seriously overreacted tonight?" I felt a chill settle in my chest. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just annoyance. A few seconds later, another message arrived. "Honestly, I was just trying to help. You still cook like it's the 1980s. People care about health now." That was followed immediately by another. To be frank, that whole small-town home cooking atmosphere can be really embarrassing around successful people. I read that line 3 times. Embarrassing around successful people. Rachel noticed my expression immediately. What did she say? I silently handed her the phone. Rachel's face hardened as she read it. Oh my gosh. Jason walked back into the room just in time to hear her. "What now?" Rachel passed the phone to him. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then let out a bitter laugh. "There it is?" I frowned. "What?" "She's ashamed of us," he said quietly. The truth hurt because it now sounded undeniable. I slowly sat down at the dining table. This table where I had fed Vanessa thousands of meals over decades. The soup when she had the flu, the heart-shaped pancakes when she was little, birthday cakes, graduation dinners, late-night grilled cheese sandwiches after heartbreaks. Every major moment of her life had passed through this kitchen, and somehow she now looked at it with shame instead of love. Jason sat next to me. "You don't deserve this, Mom." I stared at Thomas's empty chair. For years after his death, I kept expecting the grief to get smaller. But grief doesn't shrink. Life just grows around it. Sitting in this kitchen, a painful realization washed over me. Vanessa's cruelty hurt so deeply because it felt like losing another piece of Thomas at the same time. Those dinners weren't just meals. They were memories, traditions, the last living threads of the life we built together. And every joke Vanessa made chipped away at that connection. I thought about all the Sundays I had spent anxiously awaiting her arrival, altering recipes to impress her, buying ingredients she approved of, desperately trying not to embarrass my own daughter. How many years had I spent trying to earn love that should have been unconditional? Rachel sat quietly across from me. Then she asked softly, "Mum, are you still planning to invite her for Christmas dinner?" The room went still, because for the first time, the answer didn't automatically spill out. Normally I would say yes instantly. Of course, she's my daughter. But this time, an image popped into my head of Vanessa laughing while mocking Thomas's memory. I pictured the grandkids sitting there each Sunday, confused and uncomfortable. I saw myself spending days cooking for people who ridiculed me, only to end up crying over containers of leftovers.
Something inside me was finally tired. Not angry, not dramatic, just tired.
I looked down at the family calendar hanging next to the refrigerator. Every Sunday dinner was written carefully in blue ink. Every holiday was planned weeks in advance. Silently, I reached for a pen. Rachel watched me quietly. Jason stopped moving. Without saying a single word, I drew a line through Vanessa's name on the guest list for next Sunday's dinner. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper felt incredibly loud. It was final. I stared at the line through my daughter's name for a few seconds. My chest ached, but beneath the pain, there was also a sense of relief. It was faint and unfamiliar, but real. For the first time in years, I realized that protecting your family should never come at the cost of destroying yourself. The first Sunday dinner without Vanessa felt wrong from the moment I woke up. It wasn't peaceful or triumphant, it was just unfamiliar. For nearly 40 years, Sunday mornings in my house followed the exact same rhythm. The coffee before church, the grocery bags being unpacked on the kitchen counter. The soft music playing while I cooked, the extra chair reserved in my mind for the last child to arrive, and the lingering anticipation of Vanessa's critique built into every recipe. That morning, I kept waiting to brace myself for it. I reached for the butter and hesitated. Then I stopped. No one was here to judge me. The realization brought a strange wave of relief. Standing alone in my kitchen, staring at the stick of butter in my hand, I slowly laughed out loud. It was a silent laugh, the kind that surfaces when you suddenly realize just how exhausted you've been. So, I cooked exactly the way I used to when Thomas was alive. No adjustments, no apologies, no trying to please anyone. I seasoned the roast generously. I added cream to the mashed potatoes. I baked cornbread in Thomas's old cast-iron skillet, even though Vanessa once called it backward. For the first time in years, cooking didn't feel like a high-stakes test. It felt like comfort again. Around 2 in the afternoon, Rachel arrived with flowers. She stepped into the kitchen and stopped instantly. "Oh my gosh," she whispered dramatically, taking a deep breath. "It smells like childhood in here." I chuckled softly. "Is it that good?" She walked over and peeked into the pot of stew. "You used the original recipe?" "Yes, I did." Rachel smiled at me tenderly, and in that moment, a painful realization hit me. My other children had noticed every single compromise I had been making. Jason showed up an hour later with the boys. The moment my grandkids caught the scent of the kitchen, they cheered. "Grandma made the good mashed potatoes. I knew it." Jason laughed as he took off his coat. "See, this is why your house is still the best place for the holidays." I couldn't help but smile. Dinner that night felt lighter. That's the only way I can describe it. No one criticized the food. No one mocked the house. No one made sharp digs masked as jokes. The grandkids laughed loudly, and there was no tension hanging over the table. Rachel shared funny stories about her students. Jason argued playfully with the boys about football. Throughout the meal, I found myself waiting for the anxiety that never came. There was no harshness cutting through the warmth, no awkwardness, no humiliation, just family. At one point, Rachel looked around the table quietly and said, "It feels different tonight." Jason nodded immediately. "Yeah, it does." Nobody mentioned Vanessa's name, but we were all thinking about her. After dessert, Rachel asked if we could take a family photo to post on Facebook. The boys made goofy faces. Jason pretended to hate having his picture taken. I stood in the middle, holding a platter of peach pie, and Rachel snapped several photos at the table. One of them caught me laughing fully from the heart. It wasn't a forced smile or a polite grin. It was real. I hadn't even realized how long it had been since I'd been photographed looking that happy. Around 8:30, after everyone had left, the house settled back into silence. I cleaned up slowly, humming a tune. It was the first Sunday in years that I didn't cry afterward. I wasn't replaying mean comments in my head. I wasn't questioning what I should have done differently. I just felt at peace. That peace lasted exactly 43 minutes. At 9:17, my phone rang. It was Vanessa. I stared at the screen. A part of me wanted to ignore it, but I answered anyway. Hello. Her voice was instantly sharp and cold. You had dinner tonight?
I blinked. Yes, we did.
And you didn't invite me? There it was. No concern, no reflection, just anger. I leaned against the kitchen counter. We have dinner every Sunday. That's not what I asked, Mom. I closed my eyes for a moment. In the background, I could hear the city noise through her phone. Car horns, a distant siren somewhere. I saw Rachel's Facebook post, Vanessa continued. You guys had family dinner without me. She sounded completely betrayed. I looked around my quiet kitchen, the same kitchen she had insulted for years. I felt surprisingly calm inside. Yes, we did, I answered gently. A long silence followed. Then she let out an incredulous laugh. Wow!
I didn't say anything.
So this is how we're doing things now? What do you mean? Are you punishing me for Thanksgiving? Punishing. It was an interesting choice of words, as if walking away from pain was a cruel act on my part. I took a slow, deep breath. Vanessa, no one is punishing you. You are. You deliberately left me out. My chest tightened slightly, but my voice remained steady. You haven't seemed happy with the dinners here for a long time. That is ridiculous. Another silence. I don't think Vanessa expected resistance from me. Certainly not this quiet kind. Usually during a conflict, I apologized quickly to restore peace. But after Thanksgiving, something had changed. Perhaps pain eventually burns away fear. Vanessa scoffed. So Rachel and Jason are turning you against me now? No. Then what is this? I looked down at the dish towel in my hand. Then calmly and honestly, I said the words I had kept hidden for years. I just thought you might be happier if you didn't have to eat food you dislike. Dead silence. Absolute, heavy silence. I could practically hear her trying to process what I had just said. Then her voice turned stiff. Oh, please. You get criticized every meal. Vanessa, I was joking.
No, I countered gently. You were humiliating me.
Hearing those words out loud shocked even me, because it was the first time I had stated the truth without sugarcoating it. Vanessa immediately became defensive. You are being incredibly dramatic. I don't think I am. You're seriously excluding your own daughter over a side dish. The irony almost made me laugh. A side dish? As if that were the real issue. It was never about the food, Vanessa. And what is it about? I finally answered honestly. It's about respect. Another long pause followed. Then for the first time in years, I detected a hint of uncertainty in Vanessa's voice. Are you really this upset over a single comment? A single comment? I stared across the room at Thomas's empty chair. No, I whispered. I'm tired of years of countless comments. Vanessa let out a heavy breath. You know what? Fine. If everyone wants to be this sensitive, have it your way. Sensitive. There was that word again, as if basic kindness was somehow a weakness. Then she added coldly, honestly, Ethan said this would happen sooner or later. That caught my attention immediately. What does that mean? Nothing. No, Vanessa, what does that mean? She hesitated. Then she let out an exaggerated sigh. He said you always use the whole family dinner thing to guilt-trip people. The comment stung more than I expected because suddenly everything clicked. Ethan never saw family dinner as love. He saw it as an obligation, a manipulation, something old-fashioned and emotionally inconvenient. And slowly, Vanessa had started seeing them that way too. A sudden wave of exhaustion washed over me. I see. Vanessa's voice softened slightly for the first time. So that's it? You're just casting me out now?
The question broke my heart a little, because despite everything, for a split second, she sounded like my little girl. But then I remembered Thanksgiving, the insult to Thomas's memory, the years of humiliation, and the anxiety before every Sunday meal.
Finally, I answered truthfully. No, Vanessa, I just don't want to beg my own daughter to be kind to me anymore. She didn't respond. Neither did I. The silence between us stretched on indefinitely. Then without another word, Vanessa hung up, standing alone in the kitchen. A startling realization washed over me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. Vanessa didn't call me for 4 whole days. That was highly unusual. Normally, after an argument, she would either double down immediately or act like nothing happened. Silence wasn't her style. So by Thursday afternoon, I knew something was coming. I was standing in the kitchen peeling apples for a pie when my phone buzzed again. It was Vanessa. This time I answered with caution. "Hello." Her voice was calm, too calm. "I've been thinking." That phrase alone made me tense. Vanessa only sounded that controlled when her anger turned completely cold. "I think we need to talk about what happened." I set the apple peeler down slowly. "All right. I think you're letting Jason and Rachel manipulate you." I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. No responsibility, no reflection, just blame. "They aren't manipulating me. They've always been jealous of me," Vanessa continued, "especially Rachel." I almost laughed out loud at the sheer inversion of reality. Rachel had idolized Vanessa growing up, following her everywhere, borrowing her sweaters, constantly defending her. But success has a strange way of rewriting memories. "No one is jealous of you," I said quietly. "Then why am I suddenly being treated like the villain?" I looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard, where Thomas used to grill burgers every summer. "Do you really not understand?" Vanessa let out an exaggerated sigh. "Mom, people poke fun at each other. It's normal." "No," I answered softly. "Cruelty only becomes normal when people stop resisting it." Silence. Then a sharper edge returned to her tone. "So now I'm cruel?" The old me would have backed down instantly, softening the truth to avoid conflict. But something inside me had changed permanently. Now, I no longer wanted a peace built on pretending I wasn't bleeding. "I think you have been hurting me for a long time," I answered honestly. The other end of the line went completely dead. For a second, I could picture Vanessa standing in her expensive Chicago apartment, phone in hand, with that familiar look of complete disbelief she always got whenever someone challenged her. Finally, she spoke again. "Are you seriously doing this?" "Doing what?" "Acting like I've been abusive just because I made a comment about the food." The food, as if the meals themselves were the point. I leaned against the counter. "Vanessa, it was never about the food." "Then please, explain it to me." So I did. For the first time in years, I stopped hiding the truth from her. "You mock everything in this house." Silence. "You mock our dinners." Nothing. "You mock the way I cook." A sharp exhale. "You mock where we came from." Her breathing sounded agitated now. "And on Thanksgiving," I continued carefully, "you insulted your father's memory." Vanessa snapped instantly. "Oh my gosh, I didn't insult Dad. You're seriously making it out like I blamed his death on your cooking." "I was just making a joke." "Well, you humiliated me in front of strangers." "That is ridiculous." "No," I said calmly, "it is the truth." Another long silence stretched between us. Then Vanessa's voice turned completely rigid. "You know what I think? I think you love playing the victim." The words landed heavier than all the others because I suddenly understood a painful reality. Vanessa genuinely believed she was the reasonable one. I swallowed slowly. "You think setting a boundary makes me a victim? I think excluding your own daughter from family dinners is manipulative." I stared at the countertop, a quiet anger rising in my chest. It wasn't an explosive anger. It was the steady, dangerous kind that grows after swallowing years of hurt. "For years," I said softly, "I have walked on eggshells in my own kitchen every single Sunday because I was terrified of what you would criticize next." Vanessa didn't answer. "I changed recipes because of you."
Still silence.
"I stopped making things your father loved because you made me feel ashamed of them." I heard something unfamiliar over the phone now. It wasn't anger, it was discomfort, but it passed quickly. "You're exaggerating." "No," I whispered. "I'm finally being honest."
That seemed to break her temper completely. "Eh? Fine," Vanessa snapped. "If you want honesty, here it is. You take everything as a personal attack because you refuse to adapt."
I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the world changes, Mom, and people change. You can't expect everyone to pretend small-town traditions are the center of the universe forever." There it was again. The shame, the embarrassment, as if family traditions were somehow a mark of failure. I suddenly remembered something Thomas had said after Vanessa first took her corporate job in Chicago. "She's running away from something." At the time I asked him what he meant. Thomas smiled sadly and shrugged. "Herself." Maybe I didn't understand it then. I did now. Vanessa wasn't just rejecting my cooking. She was rejecting every part of her past that reminded her she hadn't grown up wealthy. And I, more than anyone, represented that past. "Do you know what breaks my heart the most?" I asked quietly. Vanessa let out an impatient sigh. What? You act like having me as a mother is an embarrassment to you. The line finally went completely quiet. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she answered in a much quieter voice. That's not fair, is it? No, it isn't. Then why do you look down on everything in this home? I don't. You do.
She immediately went back on the defensive. You have no idea how hard I worked to build the life I have now.
I know you worked hard. No, you don't, she snapped. You don't understand what people are like in my world. Suddenly, for the first time, I heard what lay beneath Vanessa's arrogance. Fear. Real fear. Fear of not fitting in. Fear of being judged. Fear that people would find out she came from an ordinary, middle-class home in Ohio instead of the glossy fantasy she had spun for herself. But instead of dealing with that fear honestly, she had turned it into a sense of superiority. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Do you know what your father used to say? Vanessa didn't prompt me.
He used to say that people who are truly comfortable with themselves don't need to constantly prove they are superior to everyone else.
The silence that followed felt incredibly heavy. Then Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. Wow. So now Dad would be disappointed in me too. I instantly regretted the phrasing. Vanessa. No, it's fine. Her voice sounded colder now, sharper. I get it. Jason and Rachel are the good kids, and I'm the terrible one.
That's not true.
Really? Because it certainly feels that way lately. I rubbed my forehead, feeling exhausted. This isn't about choosing sides. Then invite me this Sunday. The demand came suddenly, direct and sharp, like a test. I froze. A part of me wanted to say yes instantly, because that's what mothers do. We restore comfort. We ease the tension. We open the door again, even when we're still bleeding from the last time someone walked through it carelessly. But I remembered Thanksgiving, the humiliation, the anxiety, and the peace I had felt during that first dinner without her. Most of all, I realized Vanessa still hadn't apologized. Not once, not genuinely. Instead, she had spent the entire conversation explaining why her behavior should be tolerated. It wasn't remorse. It was entitlement. I took a deep breath. No, the word shocked both of us. What? No, I repeated gently. Not this Sunday. Vanessa went completely silent. Finally, she whispered, Are you serious? Yes, I am. Over a few comments about food. I closed my eyes. No, Vanessa, over years of disrespect. For the first time since she was a child, I let my daughter sit with the consequences of her own choices instead of rescuing her from them. Without another word, she hung up. Afterward, I sat there, staring at the quiet kitchen around me. My heart ached. Of course it did. None of this was easy. But beneath the grief, something else was growing. Self-respect. Once a person finally remembers they deserve to be treated with kindness, it's very hard to go back to accepting cruelty disguised as love. About 2 weeks after I stopped inviting Vanessa to Sunday dinners, Rachel called me on a Wednesday evening, sounding anxious. Mom, she said cautiously, Vanessa invited everyone over for dinner this Saturday. I stopped folding laundry. Everyone? Yes. She said she wants to host an official family gathering. Rachel's tone made me completely stop what I was doing. What's wrong? Rachel hesitated. I think she's trying to prove a point. Deep down, I already knew she was right. Vanessa didn't do things casually anymore. Everything had become a performance, a display, an image. Still, I agreed to go. Not because I particularly wanted to spend an evening pretending everything was normal, but because a part of me still held on to hope. That dangerous, tiny piece of hope in a mother's heart that never quite dies. On Saturday evening, I drove to Chicago for the first time in nearly a year. Vanessa and Ethan lived in a luxury high-rise downtown, where everything carried a quiet scent of extreme wealth. The lobby had marble floors, golden lighting, and a doorman who let his gaze linger on my old winter coat for a fraction of a second before offering a polite smile. I was suddenly acutely aware of everything ordinary about myself. My practical shoes, my department store purse, the fine lines near my collar that wouldn't smooth out. Vanessa always made me feel that way lately, as if I were in need of an upgrade. Jason and Rachel arrived at almost the exact same time. Jason gave me a quick look, a silent check-in to see if I was okay. I offered a tight nod. When the elevator doors opened into Vanessa's apartment, the first thing I noticed was how beautiful everything looked. The second thing I noticed was how cold it felt. The place belonged in a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, glittering against the dark night. There was a massive white marble kitchen, where clearly no real cooking ever took place. Soft jazz played quietly from hidden speakers. Everything matched flawlessly. Everything looked untouched. A woman in a black uniform greeted us with a tray of appetizers. I blinked. Vanessa walked over with a brilliant smile. "Oh, wonderful. You made it." I gestured toward the woman. "You hired help."
Vanessa chuckled softly. It's just easier that way.
Easier. I looked around the spotless kitchen. No aroma of food cooking. No warmth, no mess. No memories. Just a showcase. Ethan appeared next to Vanessa, holding a wine glass. "Nicole," he said smoothly, "welcome to civilization." Jason muttered a quiet "Jesus Christ" under his breath immediately. Vanessa shot him a warning glare. "What?" Ethan replied casually. "It's a joke." Rachel already looked incredibly uncomfortable. We moved into the dining area, where the elegant table held tiny portions of food arranged like pieces of artwork. I didn't even know what half of the items were. One plate featured edible flowers, another carried a foam, and tiny circles of sauce were painted onto the white porcelain. One of my grandkids whispered to Jason a little too loudly, "Where's the real food?" I barely suppressed a laugh. Vanessa heard him. "It's modern dining," she explained proudly. The boys looked deeply disappointed. Dinner began awkwardly. The hired chef would emerge occasionally to introduce each course, using words like deconstructed and infused. Jason leaned toward me during a course consisting of a single scallop. "I'm hitting a drive-thru on the way home." I bit my lip so hard to prevent myself from laughing that I nearly choked. For the first 20 minutes, Vanessa seemed almost triumphant, as if she had finally delivered a meal she considered superior to mine. Everything looked expensive. Everything sounded refined. Everything felt emotionally empty. No one relaxed. No one reached across the table for a second helping. No one interrupted each other to burst out laughing. The kids barely touched their plates. Even Rachel looked tense, trying desperately not to make any critical remarks. At one point, Vanessa raised her wine glass proudly. "See, this is what dinner feels like when it isn't bogged down by heavy comfort food." Jason stared at her. "What exactly is wrong with comfort?" Vanessa let out an exaggerated sigh. "Nothing is wrong with it. I'm just saying people can evolve." There was that word again, evolve, as if kindness, warmth, and tradition were primitive flaws. Ethan offered a slight smirk. "I think Nicole is just incredibly sensitive about the food thing." Rachel set her fork down immediately. "She's been insulting Mom for years." "Oh, please," Vanessa shot back. "I was making comments." "You were humiliating her," Rachel snapped.
Vanessa leaned back in her chair. I think everyone just loves being offended these days.
The table went completely still. Looking down at the tiny decorative bite of food on my plate, a strange realization washed over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't intimidated by Vanessa. I just felt sad for her. Because despite all the money around us, this dinner was missing the one thing people actually remember. Love. Right then, one of the boys whispered too loudly again. "Grandma's mashed potatoes are better." Jason couldn't help but burst out laughing. Even Rachel smiled. Vanessa's face tightened instantly. "Can we please go 5 minutes without comparing everything to Mom's dinners?" Jason shrugged. "You brought it up." "No, I invited everyone here to move forward." Rachel frowned. "By proving your dinner is superior?" Vanessa scoffed. "Oh my gosh, why does everyone always assume the worst of me?" "Because you constantly give us reasons to," I thought silently. But I said nothing. Ethan chimed in carelessly. "Honestly, I think people romanticize the struggle too much. There's nothing noble about staying trapped in small-town habits." That did it. Jason leaned back slowly. "You know what your problem is?" Vanessa snapped instantly. "Jason." "No," he interrupted firmly. "The two of you think money automatically makes you a better person." "We didn't say that." "It's exactly what you imply." Vanessa looked exhausted now. "Can we please not turn this meal into a therapy session?" Rachel crossed her arms. "You invited us." "Yes, because Mom decided to exile me over a platter of potatoes." I finally spoke up quietly. "It was never about the potatoes, Vanessa." The room fell silent once more. Vanessa looked at me immediately. "Then tell me, what is it about?" I locked eyes with her for a few seconds. "It's about the fact that you always make other people feel small." Vanessa's expression shifted in that moment. It wasn't entirely guilt. It looked more like deep discomfort. Because deep down, she understood. She knew the dinners at my house were never truly about the food. They were about belonging. And in this perfect apartment, surrounded by expensive plates and a skyline view, no one actually belonged to one another. Dinner ended much earlier than expected. No one lingered afterward. At my house, people stayed for hours after eating, talking, laughing, and packing up leftovers. Tonight, everyone looked relieved to leave. Rachel hugged me by the elevator. "Are you okay?" I nodded gently. "Actually, I am." And strangely, I meant it. Because for the first time, I saw Vanessa clearly, not as the powerful daughter whose approval I desperately needed, but as an incredibly insecure woman running herself ragged trying to escape her own past. As Jason and I waited for the elevator, he looked back toward Vanessa's apartment. "You notice something?"
What's that?
"No one inside that place looks happy." I thought about the spotless kitchen, the catered food, the forced sophistication, and the silence between the people inside. Then I remembered my crowded little dining room in Ohio, filled with the sounds of laughter, people fighting for seconds, and the kids snitching cornbread before dinner. Suddenly I understood something important. Vanessa spent years mocking my cooking because she confused elegance with warmth. But you can't buy warmth. It has to be built slowly, patiently, through years of showing people they are loved. And deep down, I think Vanessa finally realized that her seemingly perfect life was incredibly empty compared to the tiny kitchen in Ohio, filled with the food she claimed to hate. That is the end of part 1. Part 2. 3 days after Vanessa's dinner party in Chicago, I was standing in the grocery store comparing cans of tomatoes when I heard my name called from the end of the aisle. "Nicole Blake." I looked up in surprise. Margaret Lewis was standing there with a brilliant smile, wearing the exact same shade of bright red lipstick she'd been wearing since 1987. I hadn't seen Margaret in nearly 6 years. Of course, she looked older. We all did. But her energy hadn't changed a bit. She still carried that vibe of someone who was constantly on her way to an exciting event and running just a few minutes late. "Oh my goodness," I chuckled softly. "Margaret." She wrapped me in a tight hug immediately. "What on earth happened to you?" she demanded dramatically. "You vanished from civilization. I only live 20 minutes away from here. Where you live is practically the wilderness now." I laughed harder than I expected to. Margaret just had that effect on people. Back in our 30s, we used to work together at Parker's Diner in the centre of town. Margaret managed the front of the house, and I cooked in the back. Those were some of the hardest years of my life, but somehow they were also the happiest. The kids hadn't grown up yet, grief hadn't arrived, and family dinners hadn't turned into a source of anxiety. Margaret grabbed my shopping cart and immediately began catching up. "I heard about Thomas a few years ago," she said softly. "I'm so sorry I wasn't around." Hearing his name still brought a little squeeze to my heart. "Thank you. How are your kids?" "Oh, you know." She rolled her eyes playfully. "They're adults now, living their own lives, making their own mistakes. How are yours?" I hesitated slightly. "They're a bit complicated." Margaret gave a knowing grunt. Which kid isn't complicated? We ended up standing in that grocery aisle, talking for nearly 40 minutes. We talked about getting older, about retirement, and about how strange it feels to wake up one day and realize your children are middle-aged adults with opinions you don't recognize anymore.
Then Margaret asked out of nowhere, "Are you still cooking?"
I shrugged. "Just the family dinners." "Don't mean that." I looked at her closely. Margaret had her arms crossed. "You are the best chef Parker's ever had." I smiled instantly. "You're exaggerating." "No, it's a fact." Her tone turned serious. "People used to line up around the block for your beef stew during the winters." That surprised me, because, to be honest, I hadn't thought about Parker's Diner in years. Not really. Back then, Thomas and I were barely scraping by financially. I was pulling double shifts in the kitchen, and he was working overtime at the plant. Sometimes we would pass each other in the hallway, too exhausted to even finish a sentence. But those years mattered. Parker's wasn't fancy. It had squeaky booths, chipped mugs, and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting around for days. But people loved that place, especially the food I made. I still remember the winter of 1998, when a blizzard shut down half the town for 3 days. Parker's stayed open because people needed hot meals. I practically lived in that kitchen for the 3 days, churning out soup, you see, stews, and biscuits. Margaret laughed at the memory. "Do you remember old Mr. Callahan, the retired mailman?" I do. He used to come in every single Tuesday just for your chicken and dumplings. I chuckled softly. He used to flirt with every waitress over 60. Margaret pointed a finger at me dramatically. But he only flirted with you specifically. For a moment, standing between the canned vegetables and the pesto sauce, I felt young again, lighter. Then Margaret asked carelessly, "Why did you stop?" I frowned. Stop what? Cooking professionally. The question caught me off guard because the answer seemed so obvious to me. I'd never actually examined it before. The kids, I said simply. Life. Margaret tilted her head. You gave up a lot, Nicole. I shook my head firmly. No, I chose my family. That's not the same thing. Her words stayed in my mind longer than I expected. After we checked out, Margaret stopped me in the parking lot. Oh, almost forgot, she said, quickly digging through her purse and handing me a brightly coloured flyer. Dayton Winter Food Festival, Local Legends Cooking Competition. I stared at it blankly. Margaret grinned. I'm helping organise it this year. That's wonderful. I want you to enter. I laughed instantly. Oh no. Come on, Margaret. I haven't cooked professionally in decades, and I'm 67 years old. I shook my head firmly. I am not entering a cooking competition. It's not a real competition, she countered. It's a community event. Still no. Margaret narrowed her eyes. Why do you look so scared? That irked me slightly. I'm not scared. Then enter. I opened my mouth to argue and then stopped, because a highly uncomfortable realization washed over me. Maybe I was scared. Not of cooking, but of judgment, of criticism, of failing publicly. Beneath it all, Vanessa's voice echoed quietly in my head. Outdated, unhealthy, embarrassing small-town food. Margaret studied my expression closely. Then her face softened. Oh, honey, she asked gently, who made you doubt yourself like this? The question hit so close to home, I almost had to look away, because until that exact second, I hadn't realized how deeply Vanessa's comments had taken root inside me. I used to cook with complete fearlessness, confidence, and joy. Now, even when I was alone seasoning a soup in my own kitchen, I second-guessed myself. Margaret gave my arm a gentle squeeze. Nicole Blake, she said firmly, you fed half this town for years. I smiled awkwardly. That's an exaggeration. No, she replied. It's a fact. Later that evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the festival flyer. The faint scent of cinnamon lingered in the house from some muffins I had baked in the afternoon. Outside the window, snow was falling silently, and for some reason, I kept thinking about who I used to be before I became so terrified of criticism. Back when Thomas sat at this table, constantly encouraging me. Well, you could open your own restaurant one day, he used to say. I always laughed it off, but deep down, I loved cooking. Not just as a mother, but as myself. There was a difference between the two. The realization startled me because somewhere along the way, I had quietly stopped being Nicole. I had become the mother, the wife, the caregiver, the person who cooked for everyone else. Maybe I had forgotten that beneath all that giving, I actually had a talent of my own. My phone vibrated suddenly. It was a text from Jason. Sunday dinner. I smiled tenderly. A few seconds later, another message arrived. And Mom, your mashed potatoes are undefeated. I chuckled out loud, and a second later, a text from Rachel lit up my screen. Tell Mom she better make cornbread this Sunday. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the heavy cloud of anxiety lifted from my kitchen. It felt alive again, warm and needed. Suddenly, looking down at that festival flyer, Thomas's voice echoed with total clarity in my mind. You've still got it, Nick. Tears caught me completely off guard, stinging the back of my eyes. After years of being mocked, belittled, and dismissed like an outdated appliance, a powerful realization washed over me. Vanessa had spent so much time tearing down my cooking that I had completely forgotten how extraordinary everyone else used to think it was. Maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to remember. The morning of the Dayton Winter Food Festival, I almost backed out. At 67, fear doesn't feel the way it did when I was young. It's quieter, more rational. It disguises itself as practical thinking. You tell yourself, what's the point? You're too old. Nobody cares anyway. I stood in my bedroom holding 2 different sweaters, desperately trying to convince myself I wasn't panicking. Rachel arrived first to drive us into town. The moment she stepped through the front door, she gave me a knowing smile. You're panicking. I am not. Mom, you've already changed your outfit twice.
I frowned. How could you possibly know that?
Because one of the sweaters is still sitting on the couch. I glanced toward the living room and let out a sigh. Rachel chuckled, walking over to give my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Don't be scared, Mum. You're going to do amazing out there. That simple piece of encouragement nearly broke me. Kindness had become such a foreign language to me lately. It wasn't until people started offering it back to me that I realized just how starved for it I had been. Jason and the boys met us downtown. The kids were already vibrating with energy, fueled by way too much hot chocolate. The festival took over nearly 3 blocks. Local vendors lined the streets, selling everything from chili and baked goods to smoked meats, coffee and sweets. Even though it was still afternoon, Christmas lights already twinkled overhead. Music drifted through the crisp air, and laughter echoed as crowds of people bundled in heavy coats moved between the booths. Despite the bitter cold, the entire place felt vibrant and incredibly warm. Margaret spotted me instantly near the registration tent. "She's here!" Before I could even greet her, she grabbed both of my hands with dramatic flair. "Nicole Blake returns to civilization." I rolled my eyes. "You really need to expand your vocabulary, Margaret." "No," she replied proudly. "I know what works." She kept talking a mile a minute as she led me toward my station. "You're already turning heads, you know." "Wait, what is that supposed to mean? People saw your name on the local vendor lineup?" I laughed nervously. "Margaret, nobody remembers me." She stopped dead in her tracks and looked right at me. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "You have no idea." My booth sat right near the heart of the festival, nestled between a bakery stand and a barbecue pit. The sign was simple. Nicole Blake's homemade beef stew and cornbread. That was it. No trendy branding, no flashy descriptions. Just food. My food. For the first 20 minutes, I nervously rearranged my ladles, trying to pretend I didn't notice the people glancing my way. Then my very first customer walked up. An older man wearing a Detroit Lions hat stared at me for a few seconds, and suddenly his face lit up. "Wait a minute," he said slowly. "Parker's Diner." I blinked. "You remember Parker's?" He let out a booming laugh. "Lady, your beef stew got me through 2 divorces." I couldn't help but laugh right along with him. A few minutes later he came back with 3 friends. Then another group arrived, then another. Suddenly people weren't just buying food. They were sharing pieces of their lives. "Oh my gosh, I used to eat your chicken and dumplings every single Friday after work. You catered my cousin's wedding back in 2001. My dad talked about your peach pie for years." One woman took a single bite of the stew and looked like she was about to cry. "This tastes exactly like the way my grandmother used to make it." Her words struck a deep chord in me because I finally understood the one thing Vanessa never could. Food is never just about the ingredients. It's about memories, comfort, and human connection. People weren't standing in that long line because my recipe was trendy. They were standing there because the food made them feel loved. Once that truth sank in, something inside me completely unlocked. I stopped doubting myself, stopped overthinking, and the echo of Vanessa's criticisms finally faded from my mind. By mid-afternoon, our booth had one of the longest lines in the entire festival. Jason looked completely stunned. "Mom," he whispered, "you're kind of a celebrity out here." I smiled. "Don't get carried away." "No, seriously," Rachel added. "People are actually taking photos of your stew." One of my grandkids proudly yelled to a group of strangers, "That's my grandma." Margaret walked past, beaming as if she had personally won an Olympic medal. "I told you so." I shook my head, laughing. "You are completely impossible, Margaret, but you were right." Then the unexpected happened. A young woman holding a microphone approached the booth. "Nicole Blake?" I looked up, instantly nervous. "I'm Jenna Morris with Dayton Life magazine. Do you have a few minutes for a brief interview?" I nearly dropped my ladle. "Me?" She smiled warmly. "We've been hearing people talk about your booth all afternoon." Rachel immediately whispered, "Mom, you are absolutely not allowed to say no to this." So, 20 minutes later, I found myself standing next to giant, steaming pots of beef stew, talking to a reporter in front of a camera under the festival lights. Jenna offered a gentle smile. "So, Nicole, what makes your recipe so special?" My instinct was to say something modest and deflect the attention, but I stopped myself. For years I had been diminishing myself, shrinking away and apologizing for taking up space. This time, I chose to give an honest answer. The way I cook is simply the way I want my family to feel. Jenna tilted her head slightly. What does that mean to you? I looked out at the festival. Families were laughing together. Kids were running through the crowd. Couples were sharing meals. It means, I said softly, that food should make a person feel safe, seen, and welcome. Behind the camera, Rachel's eyes immediately welled with tears. Jason quickly looked away, pretending he hadn't noticed. Jenna smiled warmly. That is beautiful. Then she asked her final question. What inspired you to start cooking in the first place? I answered without a moment's hesitation. My husband, Thomas. It was always Thomas. I explained how sacred Sunday dinners were in our home, how food kept us anchored during the leanest times, and how certain recipes hold on to memories far better than any old photograph ever could. When the interview wrapped up, a small crowd of nearby strangers actually broke into a gentle applause. I felt incredibly embarrassed, but deeply moved. Beneath it all, a profound sense of pride washed over me. True pride. Not because people liked my food, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't ashamed of the things that made me who I am. Around 6 that evening, Rachel suddenly froze while looking down at her phone. Her entire expression changed in an instant. What's wrong? Jason asked. Rachel shot a cautious glance at me. Vanessa saw the feature. My stomach tightened slightly. What feature? Rachel turned her phone toward me. Dayton Life magazine had already posted a preview of the festival interview online. There was a photo of me smiling broadly behind the counter next to the giant stockpots. The headline read, "The woman feeding a community with love." A lump caught in my throat because it had been a very long time since anyone had used such kind words to describe me. Jason looked between Rachel and me. What did Vanessa say? Rachel hesitated for a moment before answering quietly. She commented, "Funny how people are still celebrating such unhealthy food." Jason scoffed immediately. You've got to be kidding me. But the strangest thing happened. This time, the words didn't crush me. I looked out at the crowded booth, watching strangers happily eating my food, laughing, sharing stories, and waiting in line for a second helping. Suddenly, Vanessa's opinion felt smaller than it ever had before. It wasn't that it didn't matter. She was still my daughter. But it no longer held the power to define my worth. Margaret appeared by my side again, holding a fresh platter of cornbread. You doing okay, Nick? I offered a genuine smile. Yes, and for the first time in years, I actually mean it. I should have known Vanessa wouldn't stay quiet. She wasn't the type to show up in person, not yet. But she never could tolerate feeling excluded from something where she felt she was being replaced. The real storm hit the next morning. My phone vibrated relentlessly on the nightstand. Rachel called first. Mom, have you looked at Facebook yet? I was still in bed. No, I haven't. What's going on? A long pause stretched over the line. Vanessa left a massive comment on the magazine's post. My chest tightened slightly. I figured she might. A few seconds later, Jason called. She has completely lost her mind, he said bluntly. What do you mean, lost her mind? Is she arguing with people online? I sat up in bed. How bad is it? Another pause. Let's just say she's trying to explain to everyone why your food is a health hazard, and the entire comment section is telling her to take a seat. I closed my eyes. This wasn't the Vanessa I knew. My daughter had always been confident, controlled, and perfectly composed. Lately, every time she reacted to me, it didn't feel like confidence anymore. It felt like panic. By noon, Margaret showed up at my house unannounced, holding her phone out like it was a piece of evidence from a crime scene. You are officially viral, she announced. I'm what? She pushed the screen into my hands. The article had exploded overnight. Comments, shares, local news write-ups. People weren't just praising my cooking. They were sharing their own histories. I used to eat at Parker's every single week. My grandmother learned to cook from Nicole Blake's recipes. This is what real food is supposed to be. I stared at the screen in utter disbelief. This can't be real. Oh, it's very real, Margaret said, but someone is absolutely miserable about it. I already knew exactly who she meant. Vanessa. Later that afternoon, Jason arrived early, pacing around my kitchen, looking like he was trying hard to hold back an explosion. She posted again, he said. Rachel walked in right behind him, clutching her phone tight. She's telling everyone the festival is just nostalgic propaganda. I frowned. What on earth does that even mean? Jason let out a bitter laugh. It means she hates that people are happy without her approval. Rachel hesitated. There's worse, Mom. I looked at her. She brought up Dad. I stopped what I was doing completely. What did she say? Rachel's voice dropped. She wrote, people are romanticizing your cooking because they are stuck in the past, and Dad wouldn't agree with calling unhealthy food love. A suffocating silence fell over the kitchen. Even Jason stopped pacing. This was the first time Vanessa had openly weaponized Thomas's memory. It wasn't a joke or a careless passing remark anymore. It was a deliberate, calculated statement.
I sat down slowly at the dining table, my hands turning cold.
Rachel immediately sat next to me. Mum, she's just trying to get under your skin. But Jason shook his head. No, he said quietly. She's trying to rewrite everything. Those words hung heavily in the air. Rewrite everything. Because that was exactly what Vanessa had been doing for years. Rewriting our past, rewriting our identity, rewriting what love looked like just so she could feel superior. Later that night, I finally read the full post. Rachel reluctantly showed it to me. Vanessa had written a lengthy caption underneath a screenshot of my magazine interview. She called it romanticized poverty food. She argued that nostalgia shouldn't be confused with quality, implying people were being emotionally manipulated by comfort food. Then came the line that cut deep. My mother is a decent cook, but her generation confuses survival food with actual cultural value. I read that phrase 3 times. Survival food. As if the meals that built her childhood were just something to endure, rather than the very foundation of her upbringing. Jason leaned against the counter. She is unraveling. Rachel nodded slowly. No, she whispered. She's just ashamed. That word echoed back to me. Ashamed. For years I assumed Vanessa was simply embarrassed by me. But reading her words now, I finally understood the deeper truth. Vanessa wasn't just ashamed of me. She was ashamed of where she came from. And I represented everything she was desperately trying to outrun. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about her, not the angry, mocking version, but the little girl who used to stand on a stool in this very kitchen, stirring pancake batter and telling me my food was magic. What had changed? At some point, success stopped bringing her pride and started bringing her shame about her roots. And I had become the most visible reminder of that past. The next morning, Margaret called me again, her voice unusually grave. Nicole, I think you need to see something. I went over to her place immediately. She handed me her tablet, displaying a new post. Vanessa had uploaded a photo of me from the festival, but this time she had added a formal statement. My mother has always been talented with traditional cooking. I simply believe it's important not to confuse nostalgia with progress. Underneath, she added, I support her success, but I do not support misleading health narratives. Margaret let out a loud scoff. She is really digging her heels in. But strangely, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just tired. A deep, heavy exhaustion took over as I realized something profound. Vanessa wasn't fighting with me. She was fighting with the world's reaction to me, and she was losing. That afternoon, another unexpected shift occurred. Jason walked over with his phone, a strange look on his face. Mom, you need to read this. I looked down at the screen. It was the comments section under Vanessa's post. Thousands of replies had poured in, but one comment stood out clearly. A man had written, I don't know what your problem is, but I lost my wife 2 years ago. During that time, Nicole Blake's beef stew was the only thing that made me feel like a human being again. If that's survival food, then I hope I never stop surviving on it. Then another. My mom learned to cook from Nicole Blake at Parker's Diner. She fed our entire neighborhood during the recession. And another, you have no right to redefine a woman who fed half this town. Jason looked up at me. She lost control of the narrative. I stared at the screen silently. For the very first time, Vanessa didn't look powerful anymore. She looked completely isolated, defeated not by me, but by the weight of the truth. That night, I finally went to bed without a trace of anxiety. But around midnight, my phone rang. Vanessa. I hesitated before answering. Hello. Her voice was entirely different this time. It wasn't sharp or mean. It sounded completely drained. Everyone is attacking me, she said immediately. I closed my eyes. Vanessa, I didn't do anything wrong.
And they are twisting every single word I say.
I remained silent. Then her voice cracked slightly. Mum, I just don't understand why they're choosing you over me. Those words pierced my heart deeper than any insult she had ever hurled. It wasn't anger or mockery. It was confusion. Genuine, raw confusion. It was as if she truly believed love was a competition she had somehow lost. I took a slow breath. This isn't about choosing sides, Vanessa. Yes, it is, she whispered. No, I said gently. It's about how you make people feel. A long silence stretched over the line. Then she asked softly, Do you hate me? My chest tightened instantly. Despite everything, the humiliation, the pain, the years of endless criticism, the answer was still no. But love didn't mean allowing myself to be a target anymore, so I answered honestly. No, Vanessa. I heard a shaky breath on the other end. But I can't keep letting you hurt me. Silence returned, and then she whispered a sentence I barely recognized. I didn't mean to hurt you. For the first time in a very long time, I heard real emotion in her voice. Fear. Not arrogance or superiority, but the absolute terror of losing me completely. But healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments, tiny cracks in old destructive patterns. I closed my eyes. I know, I said softly. For the first time in years, we didn't hang up the phone in anger. We hung up in uncertainty. Somehow that felt like the beginning of something neither of us quite understood yet. Following that phone call, 5 days passed without a single word from Vanessa. No texts, no comments, no passive-aggressive posts, just total silence. And that silence felt heavier than all of her criticisms combined. At first, I tried to convince myself it was peace, but deep down, I knew Vanessa didn't just disappear when she lost control. She was recalculating. On the 6th day, Jason walked straight into my house without knocking. That alone told me something was wrong.
Mom, he said immediately, you need to sit down.
My heart sank. What happened? He held up his phone. It's about Dad. My hands turned cold as Jason turned the screen toward me, displaying a scanned image of old familiar handwriting. It was Thomas's. My breath caught in my throat. I don't understand, I whispered. Rachel arrived a few seconds later, already crying softly. She posted it.
But posted what? I looked between them, my mind racing.
A letter, Jason said carefully. I felt the room tilt slightly. What letter? Rachel hesitated. The letter Dad wrote before he passed away?
My legs gave out, and I grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter for support. No, I said softly. That can't be.
Jason nodded slowly. She went into that old storage box in Chicago. Ethan got it out. My heart pounded furiously because that box held more than just old keepsakes. It held private, deeply personal notes. It contained Thomas's private letters, his thoughts, and things he told me should only be given to Vanessa when she was truly ready. I had never forced her to read it, trusting she would find it when she needed it most. I never imagined she would bring it to light like this. Rachel scrolled down the screen. Vanessa had posted it publicly with a caption that read, My father wrote this before he died. I think people should understand the emotional manipulation behind family traditions. I froze as Jason muttered an angry curse. Rachel began to read aloud softly. Not the whole letter, just the portions Vanessa had highlighted. Thomas's words filled my kitchen like a returning ghost. I need you to understand what your mother gave up for you. I hope you never mistake her love for weakness. She feeds this family because it's the only way she knows how to keep us together. A painful knot tightened in my throat. But underneath every line, Vanessa had added comments, interpretations, and twisted meanings. She claimed the letter was proof that I controlled the household by forcing an emotional dependency on the family. Jason slammed his phone onto the table. She is completely out of her mind. Rachel shook her head. No, she whispered. She's just desperate. I sat down slowly because my legs could no longer support me. It wasn't anger I felt, but a profound understanding of the full extent of what Vanessa had done. She was no longer just attacking me. She was rewriting Thomas, turning love into manipulation, sacrifice into control, and memories into weapons. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the table Thomas had built with his own hands. Every scratch on that wood felt like a defiled memory. By morning, the entire town seemed to know. Margaret called before I could even finish my coffee. Nicole, she said cautiously, I'm coming over right now. Her tone told me everything I needed to know. By noon, my house was full. Jason was pacing, Rachel was crying quietly in the corner, and Margaret was furious. As for me, I felt strangely numb. can't believe she would do this, Margaret said, shaking her head. That letter was a piece of private grief, not a chip for a public argument. Jason looked completely drained. She isn't even listening to reason anymore. She just wants to win. Rachel looked at me. Mom, what do we do? I didn't answer right away, because for the first time in my life, I truly didn't know. That evening, an unknown number flashed on my phone. I almost didn't answer, but an instinct urged me to pick up. Hello. A man's voice, polite and cautious, answered. Mrs. Blake, this is Daniel Carter with the Dayton Food Festival Committee. I frowned. Yes? We need to discuss some matters regarding your daughter's recent posts. My chest tightened. Is there a problem? He paused. Not a problem exactly, but the situation has become complicated. 2 hours later, I found myself sitting in a small conference room downtown. Margaret sat beside me, Jason stood by the door, and Rachel held my hand tightly. Daniel placed a stack of printed documents on the table. Your daughter has contacted multiple organizations, he said gently. She claims the festival is misrepresenting her family's background. I blinked. She didn't even attend the festival. Daniel nodded, which is why this is so difficult. He slid another document toward me, a letter with a legal letterhead. My heart sank. She is demanding that your interview be retracted. A dead silence fell over the room. Jason let out a bitter laugh. She's trying to erase her own mother now. But Daniel raised a hand. There's more. He hesitated. She has also filed a statement requesting that your recipes not be labeled as authentic community heritage, arguing that it promotes an unhealthy narrative of nostalgia. Margaret exploded instantly. This is absolutely preposterous. But I could barely hear her anymore because the truth finally became crystal clear. Vanessa wasn't just fighting me. She was trying to redefine reality itself. If she could convince people my food held no meaning, then maybe she could convince herself that her own past didn't matter. I drove home alone that night. For the first time in weeks, the house felt foreign to me again. Walking into the kitchen, I opened the old drawer where I kept Thomas's handwritten recipes. The pages were worn and stained, but deeply familiar. I flipped through them slowly, each one attached to a specific memory. Every little note in his handwriting felt like a conversation I wasn't ready to lose. Suddenly, a wave of absolute clarity washed over me. I picked up my phone and called Margaret. I'm going to respond.
She didn't ask what I meant. She already understood.
The next morning, I returned to the old building that once housed Parker's Diner. It was closed now, converted into a small community activity hall, but the kitchen remained intact. Margaret unlocked the doors for me. Nobody has used this place in years, she said. I stepped inside slowly, greeted by the familiar stainless steel counters, the old stoves, and the faint hum of past memories. I stood there for a long time before tying my apron around my waist. For the first time in years, I cooked with absolutely no fear. Not for Vanessa, not for approval, not in defense, but for the truth. By afternoon, Margaret posted a short video online. It showed me in that kitchen, preparing Thomas's beef stew. There were no explanations, no arguments, just the food, and my voice overlaying the clip. This isn't propaganda. This is love you can actually taste. Within hours, the video spread faster than anything Vanessa had ever posted. The comments flooded in again, but this time, people weren't debating. They were remembering. And somewhere in Chicago, Vanessa was watching. After Margaret uploaded the video, 2 days passed without a word from Vanessa. But I could feel the tension building behind a closed door, waiting to break. Jason noticed it too. She isn't finished, he muttered one morning while helping me prep vegetables. Rachel looked up from the table. She can't keep escalating this forever, can she? She offered a tight smile. Though knowing Vanessa, I wouldn't put anything past her. I didn't respond, because deep down, I knew the truth. When people feel their entire identity slipping away, they don't stay silent. And Vanessa was completely losing her grip on the story she had spent years telling herself. That afternoon, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. I answered. Mom. Her voice had shifted again. It wasn't angry or defensive this time. It was tight and strained. I saw the video. I continued washing the dishes slowly. A pause stretched out before she spoke faster. You're making me look like a monster. I stopped what I was doing. That was never my intention. It doesn't matter, she snapped. People are attacking me everywhere. I turned off the faucet. So you finally understand what that feels like? A long, heavy silence followed. Then Vanessa let out a sharp breath. This isn't about feelings, Mum. It's about facts. I leaned against the counter. Then let's talk about the facts. Another pause. You're making this so much bigger than it ever needed to be. I closed my eyes briefly. No, Vanessa, I said quietly. You made it bigger the moment you dragged your father into this. That hit a nerve. I didn't intend for his letter to... I interrupted her gently. You weaponized his words. Her voice rose slightly. I was trying to explain the context.
Context shouldn't require humiliating the people who raised you.
Silence returned, and then something entirely unexpected happened. Her voice cracked slightly. Do you have any idea what it feels like? She whispered. To feel like you don't belong anywhere? The question caught me completely off guard. Not because it was a new concept, but because I finally heard the truth beneath all her actions. It wasn't arrogance or superiority. It was fear. A deep, long-standing terror. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Vanessa, I'm serious, she said quickly, as if needing to defend herself before I could respond. In Chicago, everyone is flawless, perfect. They all have backgrounds that make sense. I remained quiet. And then there's me, she continued, her voice trembling. From Ohio, from a house that eats casseroles and uses second-hand furniture, with a mother everyone thinks is sweet, but is just entirely too old-fashioned. The words hurt, but not the way they used to. Now they sounded like a confession, rather than an assault. I asked softly, Is that what Ethan tells you? A pause. He doesn't say it directly. That was all the confirmation I needed. I closed my eyes, realizing it wasn't just Vanessa. It was an entire echo chamber of influence disguised as sophistication. I took a slow breath. You don't need to reject where you came from to be successful, Vanessa. Yes, I do, she countered instantly. No, I answered. You chose to. A much longer silence followed. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I just didn't want to be embarrassed anymore. The admission hung heavily between us, suddenly making everything make sense. All the criticism, the mockery, the distance she kept between us. It wasn't confidence at all. It was armor. I looked down at the worn edge of the kitchen table. Vanessa, you were never something to be embarrassed by. She let out a bitter chuckle. You don't understand how people look at me. Understand far better than you think. A pause stretched out, and then she asked a question I never anticipated. Do you regret having me? If I'm this ashamed of my roots, do you regret raising me? A deep ache bloomed in my chest, because the answer was an absolute no. Never. But I understood why she was asking. I chose my words with immense care. No, Vanessa? I heard a shaky breath on the other end of the line. But I do regret that you think love is something to be ashamed of. The silence that followed felt entirely different, less sharp, far more vulnerable. Then she whispered, I don't know how to balance both. That broke my heart a little bit, because that was the truth she had been running from for years. She didn't know how to achieve success while maintaining her connections, how to be modern while staying grounded, or how to be confident while remaining vulnerable. Instead, she chose distance, then superiority, then criticism, and finally cruelty disguised as humor.
I said softly. You never had to choose.
Another long pause stretched out. Then out of nowhere, Vanessa asked, Why didn't you stop me sooner? That question cut deeper than almost anything else. I looked around my kitchen at the life I had built, realizing how many years I had spent absorbing remarks I should have challenged, turning dinners into performances just to keep the peace. I thought I was keeping this family together, I said honestly. And now, looking back, I think I was just trying to stop myself from being lonely. Silence. Then Vanessa whispered something so quiet I could barely catch it. I don't want to lose you. A lump caught in my throat. I couldn't speak for a moment because it was the first completely honest statement she had made in years. No defenses, no performance. Just fear. I stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the street looked quiet, ordinary, and real. You don't have to lose me, Vanessa, I said gently, but you cannot keep hurting me. Another pause followed. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. For the first time in decades, she sounded small, stripped of her armor and entirely lost. I leaned against the window frame. Start by stopping the fight. I can't undo what happened. Her voice trembled. No, you can't, I agreed, but you can stop causing more damage. Silence. Then very softly she asked, What if people think I lost? I closed my eyes, finally understanding the true fear behind it all. Vanessa wasn't just afraid of being wrong. She was terrified of being seen as ordinary again. I said softly, "Vanessa, losing an argument doesn't mean losing yourself." The words lingered between us for a long time. Then she whispered, "I need some time." I know. Another pause and then, "Mum, I'm sorry." Just 3 simple words, but they carried an immense weight. For the first time in years, they felt genuine. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and it didn't magically heal everything, but it was real. And right now, that was what mattered. "I know," I said calmly. She didn't hang up right away, and neither did I. We just stayed on the line in silence, no longer acting like enemies, but far from healed. Somewhere in between, just 2 ordinary people again. For now, that was enough. Vanessa didn't come home that Sunday. For the first time in years, I didn't set an extra place at the table. I told myself it was a practical decision, not an emotional one. But as I set down the serving platters, her absence felt like a tangible weight in the room. Rachel noticed immediately. "She really didn't come." I shook my head. "No, she didn't." Jason leaned back in his chair. "Honestly, Mum, I think she needs the time." "Time for what?" Rachel asked. Jason hesitated. "Time to stop fighting ghosts." Nobody spoke after that. We ate our dinner in a quiet that wasn't uncomfortable, just different. There was less tension and more space, but a lingering silence remained where Vanessa used to sit. Later that evening, after Jason and Rachel left, I stood in the kitchen longer than usual, half expecting my phone to ring. It didn't. I told myself I was fine, but opening the refrigerator and seeing the untouched leftovers brought a troubling realization. For the first time, I wasn't angry with Vanessa anymore. I just felt uncertain, not about what she had done, but about who she was becoming and whether I still knew how to reach her. Monday morning brought my usual early awakening. But instead of starting breakfast, I sat at the dining table, staring at Margaret's old festival flyer, still pinned to my refrigerator. The words felt different now. Local Legends cooking competition. I traced the edge of the paper with my finger.
Making a definitive choice, I called Margaret.
She picked up on the second ring. "I was just wondering when you'd call," she said immediately. I took a breath. "I want to talk about something." A pause stretched out before her voice softened. "I'm listening." "I want to cook again," I said. "Not for attention, not for approval, but just for myself." Silence greeted me on the other end, followed by a quiet, "Finally." That afternoon, I stepped back into the old kitchen at Parker's Diner. The scent hit me instantly, a mixture of faint oil, metal, and deep memories. It felt like stepping into an alternate version of my life, a version where I still held absolute confidence in my hands and my worth. I tied my apron slowly. Initially, my fingers trembled, but the moment I began chopping vegetables, something shifted. The muscle memory, the heat, the rhythm, it all came flooding back. For the first time in a very long time, Vanessa's critical voice faded entirely from my mind. I heard Thomas instead. "Thomas, they don't rush the stew, Nick. Let it speak for itself." A faint smile touched my lips. "I remember," I whispered. Hours melted away completely unnoticed. When Margaret walked in later, she stopped right in the doorway. "You look different," she noted. I looked up. "How so?" "You look like yourself again." Those words resonated deeply within me as I realized just how much I had forgotten what that felt like. Meanwhile, the silence from Vanessa continued. No calls, no texts, no posts. Jason checked in that evening. "She hasn't been active online at all. She's completely gone dark." I stirred the pot slowly. "Maybe she needs to." A pause. "Do you think she's okay?" The question was harder to answer than expected, because I truly didn't know anymore. "I think," I said carefully, "she's trying hard to stop being the version of herself everyone expects to see." Jason sighed. "That sounds like her." But beneath his words, I caught a note of genuine worry, the kind of concern only a sibling feels when someone they love is quietly falling apart. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Not an email or a text, but a real handwritten letter. The envelope bore Vanessa's name and return address, written in an uneven, hesitant script. I sat down at the dining table before opening it, my hands shaking slightly. It was just a single page, short and direct. And, "Mom, I don't know how to say this without sounding defensive, so I chose to write it down instead. I was wrong. Not about everything, but about enough. I think I spent so much time trying to outrun where I came from that I forgot it was also the place where I learned how to love. I see now that I hurt you deeply, far more than I realized. I don't know how to fix it yet, but I want to try. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I don't think they can. I just don't want to run away from you anymore. Vanessa? I read it twice, then a third time. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with the sensation of a long-standing pressure finally releasing. Rachel arrived while I was still holding the page, her eyes immediately finding my face. Is it from her? I nodded. Jason stepped closer. What does it say? I handed the letter to Rachel, who read it slowly. Jason watched her expression intently. When she finished, she looked up.
She's trying, she said softly.
Jason exhaled. It's about time. But I didn't respond immediately. Something else was shifting inside me. I wasn't rushing to offer forgiveness or force a reconciliation. I simply noticed that the anger I had carried for so long was no longer quite as sharp. It hadn't vanished entirely, but it had grown quiet. Rachel sat down beside me. So what now? I looked down at the letter again, then around the kitchen, at the table Thomas built, at the space Vanessa used to occupy, and at the life we were all trying to rebuild in our own separate ways. I don't know, I admitted. For the very first time, that uncertainty didn't feel like a failure. It felt like space to breathe. Jason nodded slowly. Maybe that's okay. Later that night, after they left, I stood alone in the kitchen once more, clutching Vanessa's letter. Outside, the street was entirely still. The house didn't feel empty anymore, but it wasn't completely whole either. It rested somewhere in between, just like us. I placed the letter carefully on the table, not closing a door, but not flinging it wide open either. Leaving it right there, I turned off the kitchen light, realizing something I had never truly understood before. Healing doesn't arrive with a loud grand gesture. It doesn't fix everything all at once. It simply begins the exact moment you stop pretending that nothing is broken. When Vanessa returned to my house for the first time after everything, she didn't knock. She simply stood out on the porch. I caught sight of her through the kitchen window while washing dishes. For a moment, neither of us moved. She looked different, not in her appearance, but in her posture. Less polished, less guarded, like someone who had spent too much time thinking to bother with a performance. Rachel noticed her first. She's here, she whispered. Jason looked up from the table. Finally. I dried my hands slowly on a towel and walked toward the door. When I opened it, Vanessa didn't speak right away. Hi, Mum, she said at last, her voice softer than I remembered. Hi, I replied. An unfamiliar silence stretched between us, completely devoid of hostility. She lowered her gaze briefly. I wasn't sure if I should come. I gave a slight nod. I understand. That response seemed to unnerve her more than an angry outburst would have. I wasn't pushing her away, but I wasn't pulling her in either. I was just standing there, holding the space. Jason appeared in the doorway behind me, with Rachel close behind. The four of us stood in a strange quiet, looking for all the world like a family trying to remember its original shape.
Vanessa finally broke the silence. I read the letter, she said calmly. Dad's letter.
I felt a slight tightening in my chest. Did you? I asked gently. She swallowed hard. I didn't understand a lot of things before. Jason crossed his arms, but didn't interrupt. Rachel remained still. I thought success meant putting distance between myself and everything that made me feel small, Vanessa continued, letting out a short, uncertain laugh. But I think I confused small with familiar. Her gaze rose to meet mine. I didn't realize I was trying to make myself feel powerful by tearing you down. That honesty cut deeper than any of her past insults because it wasn't defensive. There were no justifications, just a plain admission of the truth. I stepped aside slightly. Would you like to come in? Vanessa hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Once inside, she walked slowly through the kitchen, as if seeing it for the very first time. The same cabinets, the same table Thomas built, the space she used to ridicule without a second thought. Jason watched her intently, and Rachel stood closer to me than usual. Vanessa finally took a seat at the table. She didn't choose the head of the table or sit with a sense of entitlement. She just took an ordinary seat. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. Jason let out a breath. That's the first completely real thing you've said in years. Rachel shot him a warning glance, but Vanessa didn't get defensive. Instead, she offered a slight nod. I know. Silence settled over us again, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like waiting. I sat down across from her. Vanessa, I said softly. She looked up. I don't need you to be perfect. Her eyes shimmered slightly. "But I do need you to stop hurting me." Her expression tightened instantly as the weight of that truth sank in. "I didn't realize I was doing it all the time," she whispered. "I think you did," Jason said quietly. "You just didn't realize how deep it went." Vanessa didn't argue. That alone marked a massive shift. Looking down at her hands, she spoke softly. "I spent so long trying to prove I was different from where I came from that I forgot I'm still a part of it." Rachel's voice softened. "We never stopped being your family, Vanessa." Vanessa's breath hitched. "I know that now." The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It felt fragile, holding on to a glimmer of possibility. Vanessa looked up at me again. "I don't expect things to just go back to normal." I nodded. "Good." A faint, broken smile touched her face. "Because I don't think I even know what normal means anymore." Jason leaned back slightly. "Then let's start simple." Vanessa looked at him. "Like what?" He shrugged. "Just show up and stop trying to win." That gave a pause. Then she nodded slowly. "I can try that." Rachel stood up abruptly. "Then stay for dinner." Vanessa blinked in surprise. "Really?" Rachel offered a slight smile. "We already made way too much food." I looked down at the table, at the space between us, realizing that what had felt like a battlefield for so long was slowly turning back into something else. "I made a beef stew," I said softly. Vanessa's expression softened instantly. For a fleeting second, I didn't see the woman she had become. I saw the little girl who used to stand beside me in this kitchen, stirring batter, spilling flour everywhere, and laughing. "I remember," she said quietly. Jason let out a soft sigh. "Can we please hold off on the emotional speeches until after we eat? I'm starving." The remark broke the tension perfectly. A genuine laugh escaped Vanessa, and then Rachel laughed too. For the first time in an incredibly long time, we were all in the same room without causing each other pain. Dinner that night was quiet, not awkward or tense, just cautious. Vanessa didn't criticize, and she didn't put on a performance. She listened, she asked questions, and she even helped clear the table without being asked. At one point, Jason caught my eye from across the room. I knew exactly what he was thinking. This doesn't erase the past. He was right. It didn't erase anything, but it was a start. After dinner, Vanessa stood by the sink with me. "I don't know how to do this part," she murmured. "Which part?" I asked. "Just being here without feeling like I have to prove something." I turned off the water. "You don't have to prove anything to us, Vanessa."
She nodded slowly, then looked directly at me. "I'm sorry, Mum. It wasn't defensive or rehearsed, just a simple, real apology."
I looked at her face for a long moment, then nodded. "I know." She let out a long exhale, like she had been holding her breath for years. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away." I shook my head slightly. "Forgiveness doesn't really work that way anyway." A faint smile returned to her face. "So what now?" I looked around the kitchen. Jason and Rachel were laughing softly by the table Thomas built, looking at a life that had been fractured but not destroyed. "We start with the small things," I said. Vanessa nodded. "Okay." Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I stood alone in the kitchen once more. But it didn't feel empty this time. It felt repaired in places. Not complete, not perfect, but no longer actively breaking. Running my hand along the edge of the table Thomas made, I whispered softly into the quiet. "We're still here." Outside, the house remained still, but inside me, something had finally settled. It wasn't an ending or a final chapter, but a brand new beginning that I no longer had to fear. Standing in my kitchen after Vanessa left that night, I finally understood something I had spent years refusing to see. Family love isn't always grand, and it isn't always gentle. Sometimes it doesn't even look like respect. But it remains love until it gets buried under pride, arrogance, and an obsession with proving you are better than the place you came from.
For years, I believed that endurance was the same thing as strength. I thought that as long as I kept the tradition of Sunday dinners alive, kept the table full, and kept pushing forward, my family would stay whole. But I learned a painful lesson. A family cannot survive on food alone, nor can it be sustained by mere routine. And a family certainly cannot survive when one person has to constantly sacrifice their own dignity just to maintain a fragile peace.
Vanessa didn't become distant overnight. It happened through tiny comments, small humiliations, and through my own silence in the moments when I should have set boundaries. I told myself I was being patient, but But in reality, I was allowing myself to disappear from my own kitchen. And Vanessa, in her own way, had lost her way too, confusing success with separation, and believing that cutting her roots made her stronger when it actually just left her lonelier. Forgiveness doesn't happen in a single moment, and it doesn't erase the past. It simply begins to take root when honesty finally replaces pride. I also learned something vital about myself. I am more than just a mother who cooks. I am a woman. Long before I started measuring my worth by other people's approval, I had my own passions, my own identity, and a deep pride in the things I created. Healing doesn't mean forcing things back to exactly how they used to be. It means accepting who we are now and choosing to rebuild anyway, imperfectly and step by step, but with absolute honesty. If this story touched your heart, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced distance, misunderstandings, or silent pain within your own family? Please share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another family story. Let me know where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. In these feelings, you are never alone.